Thank you, Mr President. I'll say at the outset I'd like to thank those members who've made a contribution today, the Honourable Ian Hunter, the Honourable Irene Nev-Maticos, the Honourable Connie Benares and the Honourable Michelle Lensink. And also to acknowledge, as was touched on, the considerable contributions that have been made previously in this place and outside it by various members. I'll note much that the Legislative Review Committee, chaired then by the Honourable Jerry Candelars, looked at this issue not once but twice. And while there was some mention made of unanimity in the committee's views, I indeed remember that at least the Honourable John Darley had a dissenting report that was contrary, I think possibly to the first Legislative Review Committee, but possibly the second inquiry into this issue. And I've actually yet to find a Member of Parliament that disagrees that gay panic defence is appropriate or acceptable. Generally, Members of Parliament say to me, murder is murder, and indeed the claim that somebody made a non-violent homosexual advance is no excuse. I say the claim because in some cases, certainly in interstate jurisdictions where this defence has been used, in fact, families have advocated for the abolition of the gay panic defence, but they've also pointed out that the victim, their dead family member, was not gay. That is in no way a slight on that. It's just the facts. We do not know what the victim did in these cases. The only person who was heard is the person who killed them. And this is the ultimate in victim blaming. Somebody who did not exhibit violence but is claimed to have made a homosexual advance has their murder seen as lesser because they are claimed to be a homosexual man. This defence is not available to women, and it is certainly not available to a woman who murders somebody, let alone a woman who is a victim. I thank, in particular, Robert Sims, who brought this issue to me almost 9 years ago, I think. What was one of the first things that he raised with me when I started as a member of this parliament, how horrified he'd been as a young law student to learn that his life was seen as lesser in those university law lectures. And that has been one of the ongoing parts of this debate, particularly young gay men learning that their lives are somehow seen as lesser under our current laws. And that is why so many years ago now I wrote to the then Attorney-General Rao and the then Shadow Attorney-General Wade, seeking their cooperation and using the New South Wales processes and inquiries that had been extensively undertaken at that time to progress this issue. The correspondence from the Shadow Attorney-General was responded to. The correspondence to the Attorney-General was not. So then I brought a bill to this place, and at that time I noted the complex nature of provocation, the gendered nature of a man's honour often being prioritised, and how archaic and out of date that was, but of course the very delicate nature where a woman who's been subject to domestic violence over a prolonged period of time also may be able to avail herself of the suite of provocation partial defences. There are other remedies to that particular matter, and certainly under law, as has been advised to the various committees and the reports and inquiries time and time again, in that particular situation, those women are indeed able to avail themselves of other legal remedies. But one of the other suite of provocation defences is also where a woman leaves a man and so offends his honour that his murder of her is then justified. Another provocation defence that we haven't spent quite so much time on. And so I absolutely agree with the Honourable Irene Nev-Maticos when she notes the gendered nature of these defences, these partial defences in the case of murder, that they are, in essence, largely victim-blaming and certainly incredibly archaic. It cannot fail to be noticed just how long this has taken. and how many inquiries and reports and words that have been uttered. And as I say, I've not yet met any particular MP who has said to me out and out directly that they do not agree that this defence needs to go. However, we will not be measured by those words, we are measured by our deeds. And here we are, 8 years later, still waiting for the laws to change. In that time, of course, where at first I was told it'll never be used. And in fact, one of the arguments was it doesn't really exist. That was actually certainly the view of the previous Attorney General Rao, that at one point he articulated that the defence didn't really exist. Then, of course, it was used in South Australia in the way that the appeal of a man who had murdered another man, stabbed him multiple times, put him in a wheelie bin and dumped that man's body. It was drawn on by his very clever legal defence team to use this loophole in the law to say that it should have been properly considered and not dismissed out of hand as not being in keeping with contemporary society. Of course, there were cultural overlays to that, and it delayed yet again law reform in this area. It is not acceptable to keep making these promises but not actually fixing this issue, because what we do is we continue the hurt and harm, particularly to gay men, but to LGBTIQ people in this state, telling them that they are somehow lesser, that they must wait patiently for equality, and that their time will come, but that time is not just yet. We are now the last jurisdiction in Australia to act on this issue. When Queensland beats us by several years, we should be rightly ashamed of our inaction on this matter. I'm happy to accept the government amendment in the spirit of a commitment that we will see action. We've been promised action by successive governments. Last year we were told, at least we had an election commitment finally to it though, last year we were told by the end of last year we would see legislation. Recently, around the timing of the memorials around the killing of Dr. George Duncan, we heard that it would be by the end of this year. That came as a shock and a surprise to many in this community, a slap in the face and a betrayal that won't be tolerated much longer. The time for progressing this is now. The Marshall government has as many reports as it needs to get on with the job, and we look forward to there being a piece of legislation before this place, this session of Parliament. And sure, it is a complex area, but there are so many legal opinions and minds gone into this. And as we know, defence lawyers do like defences, so they do like to keep them. It is time for those defence lawyers to no longer be heard in this debate, and indeed for the louder voices, the prevailing voices, to finally be those of people we have treated as lesser for far too long in this state. I really do thank all the members of this Council for contributing or supporting, and hope that when we do have a piece of legislation incredibly soon on this matter, that there will be the same sense of goodwill to get this done. I do also acknowledge the work of Murray Hill. It is often overlooked, and of course the leadership of former Premier Dunstan. But I've forgotten her name, but I actually met the former member Murray Hill's wife, and it was actually her, Eunice, thank you, Minister. It was Eunice who actually picked up, through her work, I think, in the social services. I'm not going to say the particular profession, I think, so, because I'll probably get it wrong, but she actually discovered another area that we should be addressing in this state. She became aware through her counselling, particularly of young people, that there was gay conversion therapy going on in this state, and she took it to her husband at the time, and in fact was part of making him aware of the injustices and the disgusting treatment that we place upon people, the rejection that these young people face from their families, from their churches, from their communities, that we cannot any longer continue to tolerate. So I thank Eunice in particular. It was certainly a pleasure to meet her, but also note that we still have gay conversion therapy in this state, and that is yet another area to address, but not until we get gay panic defence as a partial defence for murder out of this state for good, because of course justice delayed is justice denied, and homosexuality is no excuse for homicide.